Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Nathalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Nathalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Nathalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. Welcome to today's episode. My name is Nathalie Himmelrich, and I'm your host. As we are slowly moving into June, I wanted to take some time to celebrate. On the 21st of June, 2022, I started this podcast. So it is going to be 4 years that I have been podcasting, and as part of that, I have prepared a mini-series. I think I love mini-series because it gives me sort of a topic, a span to think about it. So I want to welcome you to this very special mini-series. So as the podcast is turning 4 years old, I have been sitting with that number, letting it sink in, because when I launched this show in June 2022, I had no idea where it would take me or how many of you it would reach, how many of you would listen and continue to listen. And also, given the research that most podcasters stop after 3 to 5 episodes, I was just discovering how intense this really was and whether I could sustain it. So to mark this anniversary, I have pulled together the 10 most listened to episodes in the podcast history. And I'm doing something that I have never done before. I'm going to go back into each one, reintroducing the guest to you, summarizing what we talked about, and reflecting on why I think that conversation resonated the way it did. I would love to hear what you think, why it might resonate. So we're going to count down from 10 to 1. Let's start. We are coming to number 4, and I have to say, as we get closer to the top, the conversation gets harder to summarize. Not because they are complicated, but because what made each of them land so deeply is something that is difficult to compress. And this one is no exception. Episode 95 is my third conversation with Meghan Riordan Jarvis. If you have been with this podcast for a while, you will know Meghan. She joined me first in season 4, episode 41, and then again in season 5, episode 49. By the time we recorded episode 95, we had developed a real professional rapport. We speak the same language, share many of the same frameworks, and care deeply about the same things. And that quality comes through in this conversation in a way that I think listeners will feel. So Meghan Riordan Jarvis, MA, LCSW, is a psychotherapist, podcast host, 2-time TEDx speaker, and author specializing in trauma, grief, and loss, just like me. After losing both of her parents within 2 years of each other and developing PTSD as a result, despite being a seasoned trauma professional herself, she began speaking and writing publicly about grief on a much larger scale. She is the founder of Taking Points Partner, which works with organizations on grief in the workplace, and the host of the podcast Grief is My Side Hustle. She also runs a free grief writing workshop called Grief Mates. By the time we recorded episode 95, Meghan had just published her second book called Can Anyone Tell Me? Essential Questions About Grief and Loss. And this book is built on the questions that grievers ask most often. The ones that feel too basic to ask a professional or too complicated to find a clear answer to. And it answers them using rigorous neuroscience and bioscience, communicated in language that is accessible and grounded in real human stories. It is exactly the kind of resources this audience needs, and it was the springboard for our conversation. So the episode took a form of a deep, collegial conversation between two people who have both spent years inside the world of grief and trauma, professionally and personally. What that meant in practice was that we could move quickly past the introductory framing and go straight to the substance. We were not explaining grief to each other, and we were exploring it together. We discussed the intersection of grief and trauma, which is at the heart of my work, how they overlap, how they differ, and why it matters to understand both if you're trying to support yourself or someone else through loss and trauma, or just loss, or just trauma. We explored what the neuroscience and bioscience of grief actually tells us about what is happening in the body and brain, and why that knowledge can be so relieving for people who are convinced something is wrong with them when they are in fact simply grieving. We also talked about the essential questions that grievers carry, the ones that frame Meghan's book. Questions like, why does grief feel like this? Will I always feel this way? Am I doing this right? What is grief actually doing in my body? What does healing look like when the loss is one that doesn't go away? These are not simple questions, and Meghan does not give simple answers. But she gives honest, grounded, science-informed ones, and that is what listeners came back to. If you haven't guessed already, this conversation with Meghan is just one that I love having because we are coming from the same place. We are doing the same kind of work professionally and have experienced similar kind of things personally. So besides what can anyone tell me, it is just us talking about the depth and the center of all that matters to us so deeply. And it's not just the essential questions that you most commonly find unaddressed in grief support. It is also the deeper understanding of both of us in individual work with clients and in dealing with our own grief, loss, and trauma. I think this episode reached so many listeners for two reasons. First, Meghan herself, her honesty, her warmth, and her willingness to speak about grief from the inside as well as from the outside. Knowing that a trauma-trained psychotherapist with 2 decades of experience was brought to her knees by grief and chose to write about it rather than hide it, gives people permission to be exactly where they are. The second reason is the book at the center of the conversation. Can anyone tell me answers the questions that most grief content skips over, either because they feel it's too obvious or because they are genuinely hard to answer without the science. For listeners who have been trying to understand what is happening to them, this episode offers something rare: clarity. Meghan has appeared on this podcast 3 times so far, and each conversation has been different. If you haven't yet listened to episode 41 and 49, I recommend going back to all 3 of them. But if you're going to just listen to one, start here, because episode 95 is where the conversation between us went at the deepest. Enjoy. Which one was your favorite episode? I would love to hear from you. In the show notes, there's a button that says send a text. I'll read every one of your messages. Take care. Until next time. Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nathaliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Nathalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.